The title of my presentation is Environmental Inequalities in the Age of Plastic. From the eco-poet Craig Santos Perez, plastic keeps food fresh, delivers medication and clean water, forms cables and clothes, ropes and nets, even stops bullets. Plastic is the perfect creation because it never dies. Perez articulates how plastic has permeated almost every aspect of our lives. Society has deemed it perfect as it is cheap, durable, and versatile. We use plastics every day, and many are meant to be single-use and are thrown away, even though they may last forever. We have become so accustomed to the convenience plastic provides that we don't often think about where our trash goes after we toss it into the dumpster. However, when we dig deeper, we can see the immense environmental impact that plastics can have, and how our overuse of plastics can be considered a form of violence. To explain how excessive plastic use can be considered violent from a Christian perspective, we must first address what biblical peace, or shalom, means. At first glance, we see shalom as tranquility, as an absence of violence. However, this view of the word is incomplete. According to theologian and former AMBS professor Perry Yoder, the term shalom is threefold in meaning, used in the Bible to refer to material and physical well-being, straightforwardness or honesty, and justice. Combined, these three aspects give us a very different picture. Peace is not simply the absence of war. Instead, it is the presence of justice, everything in order, things as they ought to be. Shalom is God's ultimate will and cannot be achieved in the presence of injustice. While I don't see people trying to shoot each other over plastic use anytime soon, there are a multitude of ways our use of plastics contributes to injustice and prevents our neighbors, near and far, from enjoying physical and material well-being. When we toss out a plastic water bottle, it will most likely be transported to a landfill where it will sit for years. The chemicals used to create plastics are not considered harmful when they are chemically linked together. However, these chemical bonds can break down over time when plastics are exposed to heat or other stresses, liberating the building blocks of the chemicals, which are toxic. Scientists have raised particular concern about bisphenol A, or the BPA, found in plastics. BPA is a weak synthetic estrogen, and overexposure to this chemical can affect hormone function. But BPA is not the only problematic substance, as other toxins found in some plastics are directly linked to cancers, birth defects, immune system problems, and childhood developmental issues. These substances from landfills can leach into the ground, contaminating the soil and drinking water, which has health implications for the locals. Many studies show that the populations confined to areas of substandard environmental conditions, such as near landfills, are disproportionately low-income people of color. In this way, we find ourselves assisting in the decline in the health of others and unintentionally contributing to institutional environmental racism by creating a great deal of plastic trash. If these plastics aren't sitting in a landfill, they usually wind up in the oceans. We know that there is now 1 ton of plastic for every 3 tons of fish floating around in the ocean, and that there's a huge mass of garbage twice the size of Texas accumulating between Hawaii and the California coast. These ocean plastics are problematic for a number of reasons. First, those dependent on the fishing industry for their livelihoods often find themselves battling plastic pollution. According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, over 97% of fishers operate in developing countries. Fishing in these areas helps alleviate poverty and food scarcity, but it has recently become less reliable as a safety net due to plastic pollution. This is exemplified in a recent article from the Times of India, which explains that fishermen in the coast town of Kochi have recently been pulling in more plastic than fish, and this is becoming common around the world. In addition, plastic damages the stake nets used by fishermen, adding to their overall cost. While the instability of a once dependable job is unfortunate, this issue is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to problems caused by ocean plastics. Plastics floating around in the ocean are even more toxic than those in landfills, due to their tendency to act as a sponge and absorb other toxins that float around in the ocean. Plastics break down into increasingly smaller pieces, which are mistaken for food and consumed by ocean animals. with millions of birds and fish dying each year due to suffocation, starvation, or slow death from the chemicals in plastics. If these ocean creatures do manage to survive consuming something so unnatural, toxins from the plastics are absorbed into their tissues. These toxins can then bioaccumulate in animals, meaning that more harmful chemicals are present at each level of the food chain, and sometimes the top of the food chain is humans. It is difficult to study the effects of plastic chemicals that flow through the food chain and eventually wind up in humans, as there's really no control group. The problem is so pervasive that it is hard to find anyone who has not ingested some kind of chemical pollutant from their food. Though we do not yet know the extent of the negative health effects associated with consuming food tainted with plastics, we do know that we are not immune to the consequences of consuming these toxic chemicals. And once again, these negative health effects are unequally distributed to underprivileged populations. In the same article, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN notes that reliance on fish for protein is especially important in coastal areas of developing countries, with sometimes over 50% of people's protein consumption coming from fish and other seafood. These people rely on fish to survive and cannot simply skip eating it to avoid possibly consuming toxins. In addition, due to their economic status, they aren't financially equipped to deal with the negative consequences that may arise from eating contaminated fish, and cannot get help to combat these health problems that they cannot prevent. By following the journey of the plastic water bottle we've tossed into the trash, we can see how, over time, the toxic substances used in plastic production can wind up on somebody else's plate, negatively impacting their overall well-being. By crowning plastics as the perfect substance and creating a world in which throwaway culture is the norm, we have unintentionally contributed to the oppression of the poor, who are less able to combat the effects of pollution and environmental degradation. While many Christian peacemakers focus their efforts on preventing direct physical violence and injustice, we must also note that we are called to care for God's creation, and that doing so is essential to promoting peace. From Genesis 2:15, the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to cultivate and keep it. Translated directly from Hebrew, we can see that to cultivate means to work and serve, while to keep means to watch and preserve. However, our responsibility to care for the Garden of Eden, the earth, our home, is not solely for the purpose of the earth. Passages like Exodus 23:10-11 and Leviticus 25:8-12 describe the Sabbath years and the year of Jubilee, which are meant as rest not only for the land, but also for the poor within the land, showing how the preservation of nature and concern for the poor are deeply intertwined. When Jesus said, "Love your neighbor," he did not simply mean, "Do not kill your neighbor." Our Christian peace perspective calls us not only to abstain from fighting, but also to go beyond current societal norms, examining even our own lives to find ways to prevent injustice and speak up for the oppressed. And combating environmental degradation is one way to do so. Dealing with the issues created by plastic pollution can seem nearly impossible, and I don't claim to have all of the answers. But I do know that we cannot begin to solve the problem unless we quit contributing to it in the first place. We can educate ourselves and others about the harmful effects of plastics, noting that they are not as perfect as we once thought. We can advocate for policy changes, such as the plastic bag bans and taxes implemented in California and 132 cities across the U.S. But most importantly, we can change our everyday habits, taking reusable bags to the grocery store, or refusing straws at restaurants, or taking time to do the dishes at family gatherings instead of using plastic utensils. Minimizing our contributions to plastic waste is one of the multitude of ways a few small changes in our everyday lives can help reduce inequality and injustice and promote shalom around the world. Thank you.